Prime Minister Narendra Modi confirmed his presence at the BRICS Summit to the Russian President Vladimir Putin earlier today over a telephonic conversation. The summit, hosted by Russia, which currently holds the BRICS presidency, will be held in Kazan from 22nd to 24th of October, which is the first to be held after the expansion of the countries in the group. The conversation comes shortly after Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Kyiv on 23rd of August, which in turn came after Prime Minister's visit to Moscow in July this year. Interestingly, the confirmation of the presence of PM comes after an appeal for a peace summit that was made to him by the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy. In his appeal to Prime Minister Narendra Modi, President Zelenskyy on 25th of August urged the Prime Minister to consider hosting the second peace summit in India. The appeal comes after talks were held and agreements signed between the nations in Kyiv, where the Prime Minister reiterated his stance and the commitment for peace between both the countries and urged Russia and Ukraine to use diplomacy and talks to bridge the gap between them. Prime Minister's visit to Kyiv just comes four weeks after his visit to Moscow. This now raises numerous questions, especially ones pertaining to India and its position on the issue. Can now India call itself a Vishwa Bandhu in helping bridge the gap between the two war-torn states? And where does this leave India in this scenario as a potential mediator in the war that has gone on for far too long? Let's start off our conversation. Ambassador Baswati Mukherjee, interesting set of developments. On one side, you have the Ukrainian president urging the Prime Minister of our country to hold a peace summit here in India. On the other hand, there is the BRICS Summit that is being organized and a confirmation that has been given by the Prime Minister to President Putin in Russia. These are two roles that India straddles with Iran. One is being the harbinger and somebody that has been advocating peace and dialogue in the war between Russia and Ukraine. And on the other side, talking about the bilateral relations that India continues to hold in high regard with Russia and President Putin. There are many people, countries, strategists who are talking about how India is doing a balancing act. What is your opinion on this?
In the first instance, Megha, it is important to remember what President Zelenskyy thinks about it. President Zelenskyy told our Prime Minister that he doesn't want India to be a balancing power or do a balancing act. He wants India on Ukraine's side. He also said that you should host a peace summit, but you should first sign on to the communique of the first peace summit, where, if you recall, Russia was not invited, and which has, in my perspective, an approach which may not be acceptable to the Russians at all. Therefore, the invitation to our Prime Minister to host a peace summit by President Zelenskyy comes, in my perspective, with several riders, which may or may not be acceptable to us at all. Secondly, I would say that indeed we are doing a balancing act because we believe that this conflict might lead the world into a major war, which may not necessarily be confined to Europe, but could spread into a third world war. Under those circumstances, we do believe that the first priority is to bring the warring parties together across the table, according to traditional methods of diplomacy. If they don't want to see each other across the table, they can sit in different rooms. Mediators can go back and forth until they're willing to face each other. That is the traditional method of doing diplomacy. That does not mean that it should be India that should do it, any one particular country. It could be a group of countries. It could be the UN Secretary General. It should be the way the two warring parties accept it. Thirdly, Megha, and that's the most important, is that President Zelenskyy is in no mood to accept that Ukrainian territory will permanently remain in Russia's hands. On the other hand, he has actually gone into Russian territory for the first time since World War II, a dangerous maneuver considering that Russia is a heavily armed nuclear weapon state, and that for the first time, NATO, sophisticated NATO arms are being used by Ukraine with the West approval against Russia to conquer Russian territory. Where does that leave countries like India, Megha? It leaves countries like us, Megha, in a very uncomfortable position, looking into a great war that could start a very warlike situation where the storm clouds presently are gathered on European skies and over Gaza, but which could rapidly spread into major conflagration. Under those circumstances, I don't think India would be in any position to mediate between two sides who don't see eye to eye on anything. We should continue to speak of peace and urge peace, but we should wait till the moment is appropriate, and we should wait for both parties to invite us, because otherwise, Megha, it's like negotiating a divorce. You end up by making enemies on both sides. Megha.
Let's get a viewpoint from Ukraine, and Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Grant joins me on the telecast. He is the first advisor to the Ukraine Ministry of Defense back in 2014. Thank you so much for joining me. And how do you view the situation that India is in terms of outreach that has come forth from Ukraine and from Russia as well? But you know, while Russia has not pressurized or chastised India in having any association or dialogue with the Ukrainian president, the same has not been reflected, unfortunately, by Vladimir Zelenskyy.
Oh, let me start with your unfortunately. I mean, if someone attacks your house and rapes your women and kills people, there's nothing unfortunate about being unhappy with the person that actually does it, or people who agree with that as being a good thing. Now, whether Prime Minister Modi sees it as being a good thing or not, his actions, unfortunately, show up that he does. And whether this is cultural, whether this is very difficult for India or not, it is as it is, and the West was unhappy with that. Now, I think that the ambassador gave an extremely well-balanced view of the whole picture as it is. India is in a very difficult position. But I think that Ukraine, as it is at the moment, is in the right. It has been attacked. The fact that it has gone back into Russian territory is normal, because if you're attacked by another country, you have to do whatever you can do to stop that. And just sitting in your own country and letting a country bombard you with 10,000 rockets, and I think it was 1,000 a couple of days ago, plus drones attacking and killing your children, you have to do something. And I think that what President Zelenskyy was asking was help in that doing something. Now, if India decides that this is too difficult and it's going to sit away from this and effectively not take the side of Ukraine, then if you don't take the side of the person that is in the right, you are by definition taking the side of the person that is in the wrong. There is no sitting on the fence for something like that.
But then the message that has been sent out by Prime Minister Modi to Putin and to Zelenskyy has been the same, and we are unequivocal in our stance.
No, the message is not the same at all.
That there is peace and dialogue, and dialogue is going to be the path towards finding a solution to this war that seems to be unending. Do you think if you are not putting yourself on the negotiating table with the Russians, can there be a solution actually found in bringing about peace and ceasefire?
Yes, beating them. That's the solution. The same as the Second World War, which you joined in, by the way, very successfully and very hard. And you fought on the side of right against Germany in 2 world wars. And you do this when you have to. This is not a nice...
As a colonial power, as a colonized country, please.
Colonized you were, but you still fought, and very heroically, if I might say so. And okay, you didn't fight, you weren't there. But let's just say that when one side is clearly in the wrong, then as a major country, as a major democratic country, you should take sides with the country that is in the right, not sit in the middle.
Okay.
Is my
Talking
view.
about,
and that's Zelensky's view as well.
I could also raise the issue of the Gaza war that has continued for over a year now. How there have been ceasefire calls that have come from across the world, including the United States of America and from European countries. The decision that at this point of time taken by the Netanyahu government is to continue the onslaught and defeat Hamas. Whereas there are human rights activists and, like I said, countries across the globe, including Europe and United States of America, that you cannot go about killing innocent people on the other side of Gaza Strip. So there has to be dialogue, there have to be peace negotiations. Therefore, Egypt is holding discussions with Hamas and Israel. Therefore, there have been discussions that have been held in Qatar with Hamas, with Netanyahu government and his representatives. There was US that was present over there. How do you justify that?
I don't. They're two different wars, two different activities, and they can't be connected and shouldn't be connected. This is what Russia has done is completely different and aside from anything that is Israel and Gaza. And you should not link the two things. We should keep to the focus on the major war in the world at the moment is the Russian invasion of Europe.
Okay, there was another, time and again there has been reiteration that has been made by the Indian government, by External Affairs Minister of our country, that why does Europe continue to assume that the problems of their side of the world are the world's problems. But when it comes to the problems that are faced by countries in the southern hemisphere, in the global south, are not of concern of Europe or of America or the West, as we call them. Keeping in mind, I give you an example, Prime Minister Narendra Modi on a phone call with President Biden spoke about the concerns that India had over the safety and security of Hindu minorities in Bangladesh. There was a communique that had been put forth to the media by the Prime Minister's office on this matter, but that part of the conversation that had been had between President Biden and the Indian Prime Minister was conveniently removed. And to add to that, there has been not a single statement that has come from any European country, or for that matter from American Ministry of External Affairs or the State Department over the atrocities that are being meted out to the Hindu minorities, not just in Bangladesh over decades, but also in Pakistan and in Afghanistan.
Sorry, but you're mixing apples and pears. You obviously have great grievances about a lot of things, but I do not believe that those grievances should be mixed into this war between Russia and Ukraine. I think you need to keep things separate. And by the way, when you say USA doesn't do anything, I'm not American, but I'd go on the White House and look how much money US aid spends around the world for all these things that you say that they don't take any notice of. It's huge. It's billions. And right across Africa and right across the South. So there is...
Jump in?
Please do.
But there's unfortunately, this is huge travesty that there have been hundreds and thousands of Hindus in our neighborhood living in Islamic nations have been attacked, they have been killed, they have been raped, their properties have been desecrated, ransacked, and not a peep comes out from countries located in the West. I'm going to get in Ben Aris, who is the editor-in-chief of BNE. He's joining me from Moscow. Ben, how do you find the situation in wake of the BRICS Summit that is upcoming and that is going to take place in Russia? And at the same time, there is likelihood, very much so, a possibility that India holds the second peace summit where Russia is not going to be a participant.
Yeah, if I may, actually, I'm in Berlin. I'm a former Moscow correspondent, lived there many years. But if I may, I think Glenn laid out very clearly the moral argument here, in so much as, Vladimir Putin, without any justification, valid justification, marched into Ukraine. I mean, you can put aside the precursor argument about Ukraine's possible membership of NATO, which is his stated problem with the whole situation. But, there's no justifying a military invasion and the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. But that's the moral argument. And I think, Megan, what you're talking about is the pragmatic diplomatic problem. And as Ambassador Mukherjee pointed out so clearly, that, we're on the cusp of Third World War. And my understanding, and I'd be interested to hear the ambassador's opinion on this, but the way diplomacy works is that it's not a moral, good guy, bad guy kind of thing. It's like we have a serious problem, security problem here, where the world is threatened with a Third World War, and we need to stop that. And in the course of that, we need to come to some sort of negotiation, and we're going to have to make compromises. And then Glenn's point about, right and wrong, beating Russia, that is the morally correct thing to do. But in pragmatic terms, taking on a nuclear-armed power and trying to beat it then pushes you towards this danger of Russia, under the Russian nuclear policy, if it's existentially threatened, quote unquote, it is allowed, and we can assume that there's every possibility Putin will use his nuclear weapons, at least on Ukraine, if not further afield. And if he does do that, then the West is obliged to respond, and not necessarily with a nuclear exchange, but I think the Americans have hinted at massive conventional response, bombing targets in Russia, and then what will it's an escalation, a nightmare scenario. And I think with this proposed peace summit, I'd also like to say that I think India is actually probably in the best position of any country in the world to play the mediator role. I mean, China obviously is an important player here because China has leverage over Russia in so much as Russia is almost entirely dependent on China to supply and export its trade. If China cuts that off, the Russian economy will collapse. However, Modi's been very careful. He went to Russia in India's self-interest and did, for example, long-term energy deals, and India is benefiting hugely from that. It just overtook China as the biggest importer of Russian oil. However, then he went out of his way to go on to Kyiv a month later and meet with Zelenskyy in order to signal very clearly that he's not in the Russian camp, and that in this sense, in pragmatic terms, he is sitting on the fence in the middle. And as such, he's an honest broker that can actually mediate between the two. And I come back to my original point that we need someone like that as a mediator, a pragmatic mediator, simply to calm things down and to come to some sort of negotiated solution, whatever that is, in order to stop the fighting. I think the actual solution, there is none. We'll end up with some sort of Cyprus scenario with Russians occupying large chunks, 27% at the moment, of Ukrainian territory. But in the Istanbul negotiations at the beginning of the war, again, it was agreed to stop the fighting and then kick the issue of sovereignty over Donbass, sovereignty over Crimea down the road to future generations.
Okay. Ben, why do you think, why is it that Russia is, reticent in attacking India or demanding more of Prime Minister Narendra Modi when it comes to picking sides? Whereas United States of America and President Zelenskyy, as he had clearly pointed out when the Prime Minister actually went and visited Putin in Russia, in Moscow, and that embrace was hugely criticized, even talking about how the Prime Minister was quote unquote embracing the mass murderer.
Well, I don't think that Russia is actually seeing this in terms of like good guys, bad guys, you're on our side, you're on their side. I mean, Putin's vision for the multipolar world that actually started this whole conflict is always been that the countries of the world should act in their own self-interests, and that there's going to be conflicts and disputes in that, and that the multipolar world, then they should come together in a civilized way at a forum. And Putin suggested that the UN would be the suitable forum in order to negotiate out their differences and come to amicable agreements. And his objection has been to the unipolar world, which he claims is the hegemony of the US, and this is why he's clashed with the US, and the US have clashed back. Russia was demanding some sort of guarantee that Ukraine never join NATO because Russia sees that as a security threat, in the same way as putting NATO missiles into Ukraine is similar to putting nuclear missiles into Cuba, which nearly caused the last World War, nuclear war. And you can debate that, and it is heavily debated. But I think from this multipolar viewpoint of Russia, that India is free to make its friends, but at the same time, Russia's interested in the pragmatic relationship with India, the trade, its partnership, its interest in Southeast Asia, and that Putin is quite happy he's not happy about, Modi going to see Zelenskyy in Kyiv, but at the same time, he perfectly understands that because he looks at the practical relationship between Russia and India, which is extremely strong, and they're tied at multiple levels in terms of security, in terms of trade, in terms of energy, in terms of their interests in Southeast Asia. And that's really what he was after. And then, any disagreements they have, they can sort out around a cup of tea.
Okay.
Can I just say something, Megha, because I have to leave? Just 1 minute.
Yes, sure, yes.
Do excuse me, Mr. Thompson. I'll just speak for 1 minute. I wanted to answer what Ben just said, and I congratulate him for it. And also to point out to my Ukrainian colleague that I fully understand his strong views on the subject. But if somebody is not on the middle, then he cannot mediate. That's the problem in diplomacy, which is what Ben pointed out. So if a mediator is on the side of one protagonist, he cannot mediate because he won't be acceptable to the other. Secondly, I do firmly believe that India should not get involved in mediation because this problem is a European problem. It began with the whole issue of whether Ukraine has a sovereign right to join NATO or not, and whether Russia has a sovereign right to protest, because it then brings NATO right onto Russia's borders, which is something which NATO has always steered clear of. So this is a European problem, and it should be solved between Europeans in the context of the United Nations, is my perspective. But I wanted to add something, which is the following. The fact that our Prime Minister went to Poland and then took the train to Ukraine was just a gesture that he need not have done, because there was also an issue of security to his life. There was a hostile environment.
No, not at all.
Let me finish, please. Let me finish. I'm not saying the Ukrainians. I'm saying there was a hostile environment. There are many who warned us that there are many in Ukraine who believe that India has sided with Russia, and therefore I believe that Prime Minister Modi took a very brave step in making that gesture to assure President Zelenskyy that we neither support annexation of Ukrainian territory, nor have we ever endorsed Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In fact, the Prime Minister had earlier said that this is not a time for war. At the same time, it is important to understand that if you are dealing with a nuclear armed adversary, as indeed India was doing for a long time vis-a-vis China until we became nuclear ourselves to protect ourselves, it is dangerous beyond a point to pull the tail of the nuclear armed adversary, because it could result in a chain of developments which could be out of control. And that is another reason, Megha, why I'm saying before I leave that this is not India's problem. This is a European problem. You very correctly pointed out, Europeans are not at all interested in India's problem, be it in Bangladesh, be it vis-a-vis Pakistan, or be it vis-a-vis China. So since this is a European problem, let the Europeans sort it out. Why should India get involved in it?
Okay, all right. Let's get in Charles Thompson also on the telecast. Charles, what role does America play? Like Ambassador Mukherjee said, that this entire issue started with Ukraine wanting to be part of NATO, and that decision has been stalled for I don't know how long. And again, the problem that Russia faces in wanting to safeguard its borders. If Ukraine falls into the NATO alliance, how must America at this point of time handle the situation, which obviously it is skewed in favor of Ukraine?
I don't think we can be looking at America at this point of time because it's distracted, because it's in an election mode. The idea, but the whole thing is, nobody wants war. This war has been going on for years. It could continue for many more years. And the issue is, are there politicians, are there leaders of countries that can actually talk to both sides seriously? And I must Look, the fact that Modi went to Russia and the fact that Modi went to Ukraine, I think after so many years of seeing this dreadful war, is at least a small sign that somebody is talking to both sides. Because huffing and puffing at a country like Russia, it's not going to go away. It's going to be on the border. People are dying. So much tragedy is happening. And of course, it's not a black and white issue. There are so many other issues that crisscross this that affect all countries on the planet, and everybody has to play their part. And I can't think of, maybe to a very small extent, I could see Turkey or Hungary possibly reaching out to the Russians. But other than Modi, who can sit down and have a serious conversation with both sides? And I'm sorry, is it Ben from Berlin? I just think what you were saying was spot on. We have to bring this to an end, and this can only happen when we have good people who have at least the ability to be able to talk and have a conversation with both sides. Otherwise, this will just continue.
Okay, all right. So then, here we see amidst the warring sides that are taking place, and as Ben said, and as Ambassador Mukherjee also talked about, and with some trepidation talking about why should India deal with problems of Europe. This has been created by America, by the rest of Europe, and of course, if I have to mention this, that if Ukraine becomes part of NATO, then it is an all-out war that Russia is going to declare on America and on NATO allies, and that is something that is the conundrum that America continues to fight, and therefore their inhibition to include Ukraine into NATO, despite appeal after appeal that has been made by Zelenskyy while going to United States of America or attending the G7 summit.
Is that addressed to me?
Yeah. How do we?
Okay. Yeah. So look, I'm not an expert on American politics, but I do believe many years ago, guarantees were given to the Soviet Union when it was falling apart and it was separating, that no new countries would join NATO. But given what that may be, India cannot separate itself from this. Ukraine is one of the biggest fertilizer producers, wheat producers. India needs oil. So, we can't separate any country on the planet when there's a war. Every country is affected, and every country has to make an effort in whatever way possible to bring both sides to the negotiation table and try and bring back some sort of peace. It's not easily done. This has gone on for 3 years. At the moment, unfortunately, the Americans are out of action. Maybe after the elections in November, and whichever side wins, we don't know, there could be some clarity, and maybe the Americans could do something and bring the Russians and the Ukrainians to the table. But until that happens, I just want to congratulate Modi. And Modi didn't go alone. He took his foreign minister and also his security chief. So obviously they took it very seriously when they went to Ukraine, and obviously, of course, when they went to Russia.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.